AMD has finally introduced its 3D V-Cache version of Zen 4 with reviews of the 7950X 3D and 7900X 3D now in the wild. Most of the reviews seem to confirm what I said about the chips back in January, and we'll rewind back to then in a second. But more than the chips themselves, I think this launch tells a lot about this new AMD. Let's do a quick analysis of the CPUs and try and understand where AMD is going next. Today's video is sponsored by Urcdkeys.com. If you buy a retail Windows 10 key, you could spend $100 or more. But if you buy an OEM key from Urcdkeys.com, a Windows 10 Pro key will cost you only $15 when you use the coupon code C25. The keys work globally, and you can even get a free upgrade from Microsoft to Windows 11 if you wish. After you've made your purchase, you will find your key in your purchased orders in the Urcdkeys website. Click on Get Keys and copy the key. Then in Windows, click on Start and type Activate, and then on Activation Settings. Then click Change Product Key, pasting the key you just purchased, and click Next. That's it. Your copy of Windows is now activated. If you want Office 2021 Professional, you can use the same C25 discount code and get it for just $60. Urcdkeys is also having a spring sale with some cool, affordable mechanical keyboards, gaming mice, and even chairs. A big thanks to Urcdkeys.com for sponsoring today's video. Check the links in the video description to get your cheap OEM Windows keys today. The 7950X 3D is AMD's first true consumer heterogeneous CPU, featuring a Zen 4 core with stacked cache and another without the stacked cache. The 3D cache chiplet boosts to 5 GHz, while the regular chiplet, like the 7950X that I reviewed, does up to 5.7 GHz. Back in January, when these were announced, here's what I said would likely happen. That the TDP of the 3D stack variants is actually lower than the non-3D. So the 7950X 3D is 120 watts only versus 170 watts on the 7950X. To me, that indicates that in prolonged workloads, so actual real-world rendering, I could see the 3D stack variant being slower than the non-3D, so possibly faster in boosts and gaming, but slower in multi-threaded. That's me speculating, but if that's the case, then the only 3D part that will make sense getting is the 7800X 3D. And just as I predicted, the 7950X 3D is indeed faster at gaming, but slower than the non-3D variant in several productivity tasks, like rendering or anything that stresses the cores for a longer period of time. And the majority of reviews came to the same conclusion: you should wait for the 7800X 3D. As a general principle, if a workload fits into cache and the cache is not shared between all cores, you will want to disable the cores that might affect data fetching, and that's the reasoning from AMD here with these chips. So in theory, Windows would park the cores without a cache and use only the ones with cache for workloads like gaming, which are latency sensitive. But then for rendering, all cores would be used by the scheduler, the ones with cache and the ones without. Now, if AMD had sent me a 7950X 3D, I would have tested core affinity in Windows and get more information. Unfortunately, they didn't, so we have no way of knowing because most of the reviewers out there don't tune their systems, let alone set core affinity. The way things work at the time of making this video is that in games where there's a major cache miss, the 1% and 0.1% lows drop massively on the 7950X 3D. So basically you'll see either a stutter or a temporary drop in frame rate to unplayable levels. This happens because there's no hardware scheduler on the 7950X 3D like there is on the 12th and 13th gens from Intel, so Windows has to do the scheduling of the threads, and we all know how terrible anything that Microsoft tries to do is. I mean, Microsoft can't do search on their operating system work correctly. Do you think they can make thread scheduling work correctly? It will be a long while until Windows adapts to this new wave of heterogeneous devices. So for the 7950X 3D to work correctly, you have to set your system to balanced mode so that core parking can be set by Windows automatically. You have to hope that the game you're running is even detected as a game, and hope that the Windows game bar sets the core affinity correctly, especially if you have heavy background tasks running, like streaming or a YouTube video running or something like that. In the cases where everything works, the 7950X 3D really shines, and I'll outperforms the 3900K by a slight margin, depending on the game. The problem is that there are many games where this doesn't work and everything falls apart. But is this exclusive to Zen 4? In my testing of Alder Lake and Raptor Lake, I found that turning the E-cores off can give you significant gains in some games. So this is more of a Windows problem than it is an AMD problem, and I'm not trying to excuse AMD on some of the decisions here. I'm just saying these are growing pains for Windows, and there will have to be a serious investment on the side of Microsoft going forward because heterogeneous CPUs will become more prevalent. The real issue is not so much technical, it's in the way AMD is marketing these chips. Back when release dates and pricing for the 3D parts were announced, I posted on Twitter that I was disgusted with AMD's decision to delay the 7800X3D because AMD knew exactly what they were doing. It's yet another greedy anti-consumer practice. For gaming, the 7800X3D makes a lot more sense and will dodge all of the problems that the 7950X3D is facing when it comes to scheduling. Hardware Unboxed included some numbers with the non-3D chiplet disabled in their review, and the performance is seriously impressive. AMD knew that the 7800X3D will be the clear choice for gamers out of these 3D chips, so they've delayed it to try and capitalize on the AMD fan that just can't wait. Well, the AMD fan deserves the terrible experience he will have with stuttering and frame drops with the 7950X3D because they are validating AMD's scummy practices here. It's sort of a perverse symbiotic relationship, with AMD depending on the AMD fanboy to sell products that otherwise wouldn't sell, and the AMD fanboy needing AMD to be scummy so that they get robbed and therefore perpetuate the cycle and keep AMD around. So who is the 7950X3D for? For gamers? No, the 7800X3D will be a better buy. For productivity? Well, the non-3D variant is better at that, and cheaper, so also no. So the only possible target here is the ultra enthusiast who will actually spend the time setting core affinity manually or disabling non-3D cores on a per case basis for the games he plays, and somehow he's also someone who needs lots of cores for rendering. Honestly, I feel like this is a stretch, and to me the 7950X3D has no purpose. It's an interesting experiment from AMD, but nothing else. Until Windows can use these types of chips correctly, you will have to endure the pains of being an early adopter of a beta product running on beta software. Now, the worrying thing here is how AMD is handling all this. Some people have defended AMD for launching their 7950X3D first because it's the high-end part, so it's similar to Nvidia launching a 4090 first to get the early adopter money and only launching a 4080 a few months later. The problem with that reasoning is that the 4080 is not better than the 4090 for the market it's being targeted at, while the 7800X3D is better than the 7950X3D for the target it's being marketed at, and it's significantly cheaper. So this isn't AMD getting the rich early birds money and then selling a lower tier product to the general public. This is actual deception because those early birds would actually be better served with the 7800X3D. Now, worst still is that if the 7950X3D was just slower than the 7800X3D, but not to the point where it would be noticeable, the fanboy could say, hey, who cares, the chip still runs games just fine. But the problem is that sometimes it doesn't. You'll see stuttering and frame drops when processors switch to the non-Vcache chiplet, and it will affect your gaming experience in a visible, noticeable way, and you're paying $700 for the privilege. So where does AMD go from here? Well, if Intel comes out with a new microarchitecture on an advanced node with proper scheduling, or if they decide to separate their gaming chips and their productivity chips and get some sort of code processor for streaming and include acceleration for AI tasks and Photoshop and such, which seems to be the direction they are going, and Intel does have the human resources to venture into something like that, then AMD will go back to the bulldozer days. All the goodwill they built with gamers with the Zen cores, offering more cores than Intel for less money, has evaporated in less than a year thanks to shady practices and terrible anti-consumer behavior. From lying in their presentations to delivering broken products with broken drivers, consumer confidence in the AMD brand is vanishing. All the hard work that Lisa Su and her team put into building the Ryzen and Radeon brands is going down the drain. There are few companies that have lasted as long as AMD have. They've certainly been resilient, but remember, the company did come close to bankruptcy less than 10 years ago thanks to poor poor decisions. Microsoft and Sony will keep AMD going as long as there's demand for consoles, and the government contracts are certainly profitable, and Xilinx was a brilliant acquisition. But client, desktop, and laptop chips are still a big chunk of AMD's business, and brand loyalty can have a snowballing effect into other business areas. In graphics, we're already seeing the impact AMD's poor decisions are having on their market share. It might seem like selling the 7800X3D a month after the more expensive parts won't have much of an impact, but as you can see, these decisions have an impact on consumers' trust in AMD. Now, there's really no point in talking about the 7900X3D, it's just as pointless as the 7900X. You either get the more expensive part for a bit more money, or you just wait for the 7800X3D. Of course, the elephant in the room is the 13900K, which can now be had for just $579. That's less than the 7900X3D, let alone the 7950X3D, which performs about the same in gaming, with a few wins here and a few losses there. The money you save on the 13900K lets you upgrade the RAM, for instance, or get more storage. To me, the 7950X3D, which is AMD's flagship consumer CPU, just doesn't make sense. If AMD's top dog CPU doesn't have buyers, what will happen to that high margins narrative that Lisa Su has been promoting to investors? With the lackluster sales of the 7900's GPUs and no buyers for these 3D chips with the exception of the 7800X3D, where is AMD getting this high margin profit from? AMD needs to rethink how they are positioning their products. They need a new marketing strategy and a new marketing team, if you ask me, and they need to think about how they will keep their dwindling fan base around, and they need a reality check when it comes to pricing their products. The current plan just isn't working. What CPU would I personally buy right now? Either 12900K or 13700K from Intel, or a 5800X3D on AM4. At around $400, the 13700K is probably the best all-rounder at the moment. This video was made possible by my awesome patrons. By supporting my channel on Patreon, you will gain access to the Cortex Discord server, where you can talk to me directly and join a welcoming community of tech enthusiasts. If you can't contribute at this time, then give this video a like and share it, as that really helps. Thanks for watching, and until the next one.